Welcome to where time falls quiet.
Sumer wasn't first. The evidence hidden under the flood. Take a moment to subscribe, so this place of calm is always here for you. What if Sumer was not the beginning? The question sounds almost blasphemous to the foundations of recorded history. It unsettles everything that scholars, archaeologists, and textbooks have agreed upon for more than a century. Yet the silence that follows that question feels heavier than denial, as if the dust itself hesitates before answering. Imagine the first archaeologists kneeling in the heat of southern Mesopotamia, brushing away the grains of time to reveal the cuneiform signs of a language already perfected. They expected fragments of a primitive dawn, the slow birth of writing from the confusion of marks. What they found instead was structure, syntax, and bureaucracy. Sumer entered history fully formed, its city-states already calculating, legislating, worshipping, and recording with the precision of an old memory renewed. There was no visible apprenticeship. Civilization seemed to appear not as a child learning to speak, but as an elder suddenly remembering how. The unease began there beneath the ruins of Uruk and Eridu. Cuneiform tablets, some fragile as eggshells, described not invention, but restoration. They spoke of kings who ruled before the flood, of rebuilding what had been lost, of measuring the heavens to align temples to stars that no human living could see with the naked eye anymore. And you, listener, can imagine the strangeness of holding one of those tablets now, the clay still warm from the kiln of the past, dense with signs that whisper of a prior world. Every known civilization carries within its oldest texts a sense of repetition. Egypt called it Zep Tepi, the first time. The Mayans spoke of previous ages purified by water and fire. Sumerians wrote about a deluge that reset the order of kingship. What unites them is not fantasy but bureaucracy. Their myths are organized like ledgers, their gods catalogued, their eras measured in precise numbers of years. This is not the language of invention. It is the tone of administration, an archive being copied, not created. The archaeologists called it preposterous. They said myth was myth, and that the appearance of completeness was an illusion caused by missing data. But the evidence kept resisting simplification. They unearthed periods of abrupt transition, layers where high craftsmanship in ceramics, metallurgy, and city planning emerged without precedent in the layers below. Geologists studying those strata whispered of flood deposits, not mythic but mineral. Fine clays compacted over eroded surfaces, the remains of a disaster that erased memory, but not traces. Imagine the texture of that sediment beneath your fingertips. Each layer is an entry in a record no scribe intended to write. Beneath the royal foundations of lay a seam of sterile mud, a silent expanse between civilizations. Above it, human order resumes, neat rows of bricks, standardized measures, unmistakably planned geometry. Below it, nothing but chaos. A gap, but not an origin. The pattern repeats. An interruption, then restoration. Civilizations do not emerge. They remember themselves back into being. The hesitation to face this idea is understandable. It dismantles the myth of linear progress, the cherished idea that humanity began in simplicity and ascended toward complexity. But the Earth's own archive tells another story. The layers do not ascend, they oscillate. Cultures reach peaks of order, collapse into silence, and then, impossibly, rise again. repeating equations, reusing ratios, rebuilding temples aligned to the same celestial coordinates. The process is not invention, it is recovery. When Sumer built its ziggurats, each terrace mirrored not only the heavens, but older plans buried within collective memory. The sexagesimal system they used, the division of the circle into 360 degrees, the calculation of time, was so mathematically elegant it felt inherited. It was as though they had reactivated an old algorithm left dormant in the human mind. Scholars still debate why that base of 60 was chosen, but the question itself may be inverted. What if they did not choose it? What if they remembered it? The first line of the Sumerian king list makes a strange proclamation. When kingship descended from heaven, it was at Eridu. But Eridu itself was not a beginning. It was built over older temples, older foundations, older floods. Excavations reveal as many as 18 stratified rebuildings, each layer reconstructing the last as if in devotion to the memory of the same design. To look down through that mound is to look through time's stacked attempts at resurrection. Archaeologists once took the phrase "descended from heaven" as mythology. Later, some linguists noted the phrase in Sumerian could more precisely be rendered as "was once restored from above." Suddenly, the tone shifts. It is not gods bestowing authority, but survivors reinstating lost order, perhaps inheriting a system of governing and astronomy from those who preserved memory before the flood. The list begins not at the first act of creation, but at the first act of recovery. Now imagine the scene: a scribe sitting before a tablet of wet clay, copying lists from older tablets already worn and half eroded. He does not understand every symbol he copies. Some numbers seem absurd, reigns of thousands of years, calculations too precise for his own generation. Yet tradition commands preservation, not comprehension. He senses continuity, not innovation. That is the paradox at the root of civilization. We copy before we understand. In modern repositories, those same tablets rest under fluorescent light, inventory numbers replacing royal ones, CBS 10673, WB 444, and others. Their surfaces are bureaucratic, yet their implications are metaphysical. They record cycles, ratios, and celestial patterns beyond the need of the farmers for whom they were supposedly written. Why does a record-keeping system for grain include astronomical constants describing the precessional motion of the earth? Why encode the heavens into the ledgers of kings? Some will insist coincidence. Others whisper inheritance. The whisper grows louder when similar ratios and orientations surface in other corners of the ancient world: Egyptian, Indus, Andean, each following geometric alignments toward the same stars: Orion's belt, Sirius, the solstitial rising points. These are not merely aesthetic choices, they are coordinates. Across cultures, the same cosmic grammar resurfaces, as if decoded from a forgotten textbook. The pattern persists even when oceans and centuries separate the civilizations that repeat it. You begin to sense an unease in this recurrence. It feels less like discovery and more like recollection. A kind of global déjà vu encoded in stone. The builders of the first city walls in Sumer may have worked from blueprints they did not design, but felt obligated to preserve. The lines of mud brick, the ratios of base to height, follow laws whispered rather than reasoned. In that sense, archaeology may not be about uncovering invention, but tracing the fidelity of memory over millennia. To speak of memory in stone is to speak of endurance and amnesia at once. Each monument remembers an idea but forgets its context, leaving us to wonder what original template it echoes. And this is where the discomfort deepens. If our civilization were to fall, leaving behind data centers buried in silt, could future beings infer the logic of our algorithms merely from their material shells? Or would they too think we invented complexity from nothing? Silence answers again. The sands of southern Iraq remain indifferent, though beneath them glimmer the remnants of earlier cities still unnamed. Satellite imagery has begun revealing outlines invisible to the human eye, subterranean geometry too regular to be natural. Archaeologists hesitate. The funding is scarce, the climate harsh, the politics delicate. Yet each new survey adds another unsettling hint. The map of origins may be palimpsest, layers of lost epochs beneath the familiar Sumerian grid. Pause here and hold that sensation. The recognition that the beginning might be a repetition. The first civilization we can name may have been the last echo of a world too old for names. Its perfection at birth is not proof of genius, but evidence of remembrance. Fragments of a manual carried through the flood, encoded in myth, retranslated in clay. The past is not linear. It is recursive, folded like sediment under pressure, compressing memory until it becomes stone. There is a temptation to resolve the mystery by naming culprits, gods, outsiders, lost continents, but the deeper truth is more human and more haunting. Knowledge, when lost, does not vanish completely. It hides in pattern, in geometry, in ratios too elegant to die. Suma's story begins in restoration because every civilization begins that way, salvaging fragments, translating echoes, piecing together a world once known. So when you hear the phrase, the cradle of civilization, imagine instead a cradle crafted from shards, the fragments of an older song. Each inscription, each law code, each temple alignment is a note in that melody of recovery. The question that should not be asked, what came before, remains suspended, unanswered but persistent. For beneath every genesis lies an inheritance too vast to measure, waiting for the attentive ear to listen through the silence. And perhaps that is why the question endures despite discomfort. Because it is not merely historical, it is existential. What if civilization is not humanity's ascent, but its amnesia repeating in cycles, the same striving for order rising after each forgetting? If Sumer was not the beginning, then we are not the pinnacle. We are, like them, curators of remnants, inheritors of echoes, trying once more to remember the blueprint of the world before the waters came. From the very first discoveries at Uruk and Eridu, scholars spoke in paradoxes. They expected slow accumulations, scribbles evolving into scripts, barter morphing into economics, superstition refining into theology. Instead, what they found was a civilization that arrived already fluent. Its writing system was orderly, its urban planning geometric, and its administration unmistakably calibrated. It was as though someone had handed Sumer a completed formula and said, "Now, copy." Imagine being an archaeologist standing on the desert plain of southern Mesopotamia, excavating the oldest strata of Uruk. You dig through sterile sand expecting primitive huts, and uncover instead city walls of baked brick, so perfect in measurement, they rival the standards of modern engineering. Drainage channels, standardized weights, and regulated streets appear in a sequence with no experimental phase in between. This was not spontaneous growth. It was controlled emergence designed from an invisible blueprint. The more the excavations continued, the clearer the contradiction became. Sumer did not stumble into civilization, it awakened into it. Cuneiform appears as complex accounting before it ever becomes literature. Mathematics begins as sexagesimal tables already optimized for astronomical calculation. Irrigation networks stretch for miles in elegant geometry. Every sign suggests memory, not invention, and you begin to feel the discomfort of the impossible. How can the first known civilization begin with maturity? To understand the magnitude of this enigma, imagine how deep cultural layering must run. Between hunter societies and these urban planners, there should be hundreds of traceable steps, intermediate settlements, imperfect trials, half-finished experiments. Yet archaeologists found only silence. The gap defies the textbook narrative of progress. Complexity seems to emerge out of nothing, as though an invisible hand had guided brick and symbol according to forgotten equations. The writing system crystallized quickly into bureaucratic structure. Administrative tablets recorded grain allocations, taxation, and temple inventories with decimal and sexagesimal precision. The scribes documented each measure of barley, each herd of cattle in clay as precise as digital code. The script's integration was immediate. It was agglutinative and systematic. It had technical terms for accounting, celestial cycles, and metallurgy. Such linguistic maturity implies not genesis, but refinement. There was no infancy stage of writing. It appeared adult. This abrupt perfection perplexed early scholars. Some proposed external influences, forgotten migrants, or divine inspiration. Others simply avoided the question, insisting missing layers would surface with time. Yet decade after decade, the absence held firm. Beneath the earliest great cities, Uruk, Lagash, Eridu, lay not chaos, but sterile flood layers separating their birth from simpler eras. The sediment behaved like a curtain between epochs, marking a discontinuity not just of geology, but of knowledge. Consider the architecture, temples rising according to ratios of base to height, recurring across sites separated by centuries. Each dimension aligns with astronomical directions, the solstitial horizon, the lunar standstill line. No novice builders could have achieved such consistency without long observational practice. The ziggurats were not mere shrines, they were instruments of calibration, synchronizing heaven with earth. They bear the mark of too old to have developed locally in so few generations. The same paradox extends to governance. The earliest known law systems, such as those later attributed to Ur-Nammu and Lipit Ishtar, emerged from a scribal bureaucracy that already assumed structural authority. There was no archaeological evidence of experimentation, only codification. Civil regulation appears simultaneously with institutional architecture, both suggesting continuation rather than origin. The tone of those laws is chillingly modern. Categorized offences, fines in silver, procedural language. Law was not born. It was reinstated. In each of these areas, architecture, law, mathematics, astronomy, Sumer did not experiment. It recollected. And you, stepping into this narrative, can sense a whisper of déjà vu in humanity itself. Every tablet, every monument seems to carry traces of earlier logic polished by unknown hands. When civilization wakes from amnesia, it does not learn, it remembers. And memory, when it translates into clay, carries an eerie fluency that no invention can explain. To grasp the depth of this inheritance, look closer at their numeration. Base 60 is mathematically elegant, accommodating multiples of 2, 3, 4, 5. It divides easily and harmonizes with cyclical time. Astronomers still use it to measure arcs and durations. But the enigma is its appearance whole, without trial versions or decimal precursors. The earliest Sumerian tablets already treat 60 as natural. Why? Because the system's origin lies beyond observation, carried forward by habit like a word whose etymology has been forgotten. Similarly, the Sumerian calendar was not naive. It balanced lunar and solar cycles with an accuracy that presupposes generations of sky watching. Each month corresponded to a specific constellation shift, recorded meticulously. Their alignment of temples to stellar coordinates implies knowledge of precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis measurable only over thousands of years. Yet these were the supposed beginners. How could observation on that scale exist at a civilization's birth? Some historians attempt to explain such sophistication as coincidence, the rapid coalescence of separate crafts into a singular system. But coincidence falters under the density of data. Every domain repeats the same theme: sudden excellence. The first written myths are already philosophically mature, describing cyclical floods and cosmic architectures that echo later Greek reasoning. The first mathematics is already capable of generating triples comparable to what we now call Pythagorean. Perhaps discovery had happened before, recorded elsewhere, lost, then recalled by survivors who retained fragments of an older toolkit. The mind instinctively resists this notion. We prefer beginnings clean and traceable. To imagine pre-Sumerian intelligence equal or superior to recorded Sumer is to invite the vertigo of deep time, the sense that history is not evolving upward but oscillating between illumination and loss. The silence between civilization layers then becomes sinister, a void not of ignorance but of erasure. In the city of Uruk's earliest phase, archaeologists expected primitive shrines. Instead, they found standardized molds for bricks, each marked with the same orientation marks used for centuries afterward. This perpetuation implies institutional memory, craft inherited through ritual repetition. Even artisans followed inherited templates, ensuring that the old ratios survived despite new rulers. It was a religion of precision, as if the correct shape itself preserved a cosmic covenant. Sumer's abrupt brilliance could thus be the surface of something older, a reactivated inheritance transmitted through survival myths and encoded ritual. When the first farmers settled the floodplain, they may have carried techniques from lost homelands, embedding ancestral geometry into their new earthworks. Over generations, practical habit hardened into sacred law. The blueprint remained, even after its origin blurred into legend. Listen closely to the Sumerian hymns, the few that remain intact in translation. They do not sing of beginnings, but restorations. The gods do not create, they rebuild after destruction. The temples are re-established, not constructed ex nihilo. Even creation myths carry undertones of return. A world drowned, reborn, reordered. The human duty is remembrance, not fabrication. That linguistic motif should trouble us because it implies they knew they lived in the shadow of an earlier great pattern. The archaeological narrative then becomes tragic rather than triumphant. Sumer is remembered not for invention, but for salvage, the gathering of shards after some nameless collapse. Imagine generations scraping meaning from ruin, standardizing measures to preserve continuity, recording lists so that names would outlast the next flood. Civilization, in that light, is an act of defiance against oblivion. Each tablet a sandbag against forgetting. And if Sumer emerged suddenly because its founders rebuilt from memory, that memory must have persisted somehow, carried in oral lineage, in migratory tribes, perhaps in survivors of an imagined flood who wandered until fertile plains allowed reconstruction. Their skill, passed down subconsciously, reappeared as full competence. The human brain becomes an archive deeper than excavated strata, storing geometries and ratios under layers of myth until the time to use them returns. The story of civilization therefore reads less like a genesis and more like a recurrence. The absence of prototypes, of gradual experimentation, becomes evidence of inherited mastery. Anthropologists may dismiss the gap as missing data, yet the emotional intuition of it remains unsettling. You can feel that absence like pressure beneath the surface. What if discovery is the natural act of remembering what was once widespread knowledge, temporarily obscured by disaster? Archaeology cannot yet prove such a lineage, but its evidence whispers. Stone channels reused from earlier ruins, myths of measurement descending from the heavens, terminology that appears technical beyond the society's known need, all converge toward the same possibility. Humanity may possess a deeper memory repeating itself through epochs. Civilization, seen this way, is cyclical. The forms dissolve, but the ratios remain, waiting for rediscovery. So when you stand before the clay tablets glowing under museum light, imagine them not as inventions, but echoes, restored entries from an archive that transcends one culture. The perfection of early Sumerian society is less astonishing when seen as recollection instead of miracle. And perhaps the unease we feel before its inexplicable maturity is the faint recognition that we are repeating the same restoration now. Every algorithm, every law, every map drawn today might be another reconstruction of an idea buried deep beneath the floodplain of collective memory. The flood is a silence layered in mud. It is not myth, it is sediment, full of microscopic truths that refuse oblivion. Beneath the ancient plains of southern Mesopotamia, riverbeds intertwine with history itself. Each layer of clay speaks of water arriving not as blessing, but as final punctuation upon a vanished age. Imagine standing inside an excavation trench at Ur. The air is still, dense with the scent of wet soil and time. At knee depth lies a dark line, fine, compact, homogeneous. Archaeologists call it the flood layer. It is sterile, devoid of pottery, ash, or bone. A blanket laid not by human hands, but by a catastrophe that ended memory. Above it, civilization resumes as if awakened from long sleep. Below it, nothing but ruin without detail. That seam of silence has been found again and again, from Kish to Shurupak, from Uruk to Ur. Its thickness varies, but the story remains. Before it, scattered villages. After it, writing, administration, law. The chronology bends around this gap as though humanity itself had been submerged and rewritten. You sense that the deluge was not an event but a hinge, a threshold dividing one order of the world from another. Geologists note the texture. Uniform silt deposited in a low-energy environment. Evidence of standing water, not a simple river flood. It extends for hundreds of kilometers, smooth and consistent across sites separated by days of travel. This was not seasonal overflow, it was systemic. The Euphrates and Tigris erased their banks, transforming fertile plain into inland sea. Beneath that sea, the infrastructure of a former world was ground into oblivion. The Sumerians remembered. They called it the flood that ended kingship, the water that scoured both gods and men. Tablets speak of survivors chosen for their devotion, of a single vessel preserving laws, measures, and seeds. The story feels mythic until one touches the actual sediment. At that moment, myth dissolves into stratigraphy. The flood is not a parable, it is the scar tissue of the earth. Imagine, listener, being one of those survivors. The river has swallowed your home, your temples, every trace of your dead. The horizon is emptiness, the water reflecting a sky stripped of stars by dust. When the waters recede, the world feels newborn, but haunted. Each grain of silt is both burial and seed. How would you rebuild? From memory, of course, from fragments remembered in your blood. Civilization would not begin anew. It would be a restoration performed by the traumatized. That trauma is embedded in Sumerian cosmology. Their gods weep, rebuild, regulate. Their myths oscillate between loss and order. Even the cuneiform sign for life resembles a stalk emerging from floodwater. Beneath their theology runs the steady pulse of geological memory. They never forgot that existence itself was provisional, contingent upon the mercy of rivers. Each ritual of canal maintenance, each offering to Enki, the god of wisdom and the deep, was a negotiation with the element that both destroys and preserves. Modern archaeologists often avoid the undertone of reverence in those texts, but there is a deeper recognition there. They knew water, as archives know ink. Floods erase, yet also record through layering. The clay they inscribed upon after the deluge was itself the remnant of their predecessors' disaster. To write was to renovate loss. Every symbol pressed into mud was a declaration that memory would not surrender to catastrophe. Beneath this geological narrative, traces of earlier habitation whisper faintly. Ground-penetrating surveys reveal faint walls, darker soil discolorations under the flood layer, hints of architecture not officially recognized. The sediment has enfolded what may have been older urban grids, erased beneath the mythic event. The flood did not create civilization, it buried one and gave birth to its memory, reborn. What emerged afterward was Sumer's echo, meticulous, cautious, haunted by precision. The power of the flood myth stems from its factual plausibility. Across the globe, similar memories persist. The Egyptians spoke of Nun, a primordial sea from which land was reborn. In the Hebrew narrative, the waters retreat to reveal mountains again. Far across the ocean, ancient American traditions recall worlds drowned and remade. Each account carries identical geometry. Destruction yields rebirth, and rebirth arrives with fragments of what came before. Myth becomes fossilized memory. Geophysicists analyzing subsurface cores around the Persian Gulf find sand deposits suggesting that the Gulf itself was once fertile land, flooded around the same era. If that submerged plain had hosted settlements, their memory would surface only through refugees. Those refugees seeking new ground might have carried agricultural techniques, celestial mapping, and even religious codes westward into the floodplains of Mesopotamia. The flood becomes both disaster and transmission, its brutal reset and humanity's forced migration of memory. Close your eyes and picture the aftermath. Survivors marking the new waterline, aligning temples to the same stars now shifted slightly by precession. They would rebuild according to remembered maps, striving to restore lost equilibrium. Every measure of brick, Every ritual song would be performance of nostalgia. Through this process of mourning, civilization revived. Not innovation, but repetition. Not genesis, but desperate remembrance disguised as order. The archaeological record proves this rhythm through absence. Tools vanish, appear again centuries later with identical design. Styles expire, re-emerge intact. Even mythic motifs, such as the twin rivers, the divine boat, the seven sages, persist across temporal chasms, as if immune to time. Memory, it seems, floats even when stone sinks. The flood became the template upon which all subsequent recoveries would be modelled. In the laboratory, a pale sediment from still resists categorization. Its oxygen isotopes hint at freshwater accumulation inconsistent with normal overflow. Some researchers whisper of cosmological triggers, cometary debris, atmospheric collapse, sudden climate shift ending an age. The cause remains ambiguous, but the consequence is clear. An old world was expunged, and the survivors who repopulated the region inherited more than fertile mud. They inherited a sense of cyclic doom. This doom translates into their meticulousness. To prevent chaos, they measured everything: water flow, grain, the length of shadows at solstice. They believed precision could ward off recurrence. Each temple therefore doubled as observatory, each priest as engineer. The earth became a ledger balancing chaos and order. They built civilization as if the flood were still rising, as if every brick must hold back eternity. Notice how the language of their myths aligns with hydrology. Words for law and canal share roots. Regulation is literally irrigation. To govern was to channel, to master flow before it mastered them. This semantic inheritance is not coincidence. It is the expression of collective trauma molded into government. Civilization is the dam built against oblivion. The flood persists in every word of policy and architecture alike. Even today, traces of that ancient submersion influence modern geography. The marshes of southern Iraq guard ghost lines of former shorelines. When the light is low, satellite images reveal rectangles and circles, possible harbours of forgotten settlements. Beneath meters of silt, sensors detect anomalies, geometry surviving neglect. The whisper beneath the flood continues, unheard but insistent, shaping how we think of origins. If we treat history as sedimentation rather than timeline, the flood becomes a geological page turn, not an interruption, but punctuation. Each era writes atop the compression of the last, using its ruins as ink. Suma's story, then, is not heroism after catastrophe. It is the echo of a template older than language. Cataclysm and restoration are inseparable because memory needs destruction to be reborn, sharply enough to matter. Listen carefully. When ancient texts describe the gods imposing measure after the waters, they invoke more than divine order. They describe intellectual salvage. To measure is to remind, to re-establish boundaries drowned by chaos. From that act of redefinition came calendars, architecture, and mathematics, all inventions of recollection. Every calculation in clay was an attempt to fix what the waters had once unmade. So the flood was not punishment. It was preservation disguised as loss. It sealed history beneath layers resistant to decay, forcing descendants to rediscover rather than inherit. Through that enforced forgetting, knowledge became sacred, its recovery miraculous. The flood, then, is civilization's cruel teacher, proving that memory survives only when threatened. And perhaps, standing amid the ruins of you might feel the echo. The wind moves across the plain like breath over an ancient scar. The soil hums faintly with moisture too deep to touch. That is the whisper beneath the flood, the reminder that every beginning hides a drowning, and every act of remembrance is an excavation of silence. Civilization rises each time the waters recede, trembling, rebuilding itself from the memory of the abyss. Stone does not forget. Long after language erodes and clay crumbles, the geometry remains, the mute testimony of intentions older than history. Across continents and ages, identical patterns reappear as if the same draftsman had drawn them repeatedly across epochs. Triangular alignments, perfect circles, axial symmetries, blueprints echoing through lost centuries, the signature of engineers whose names are dust, but whose logic endures. When one walks amid the ruins of Eridu, one senses not experimentation, but replication. Each temple foundation mirrors its predecessor, carefully oriented to stars whose rising points shift only across millennia. The builders labored with reverence, measuring base lengths according to ratios, encoded in celestial motion. No one knows how they determined such alignments without complex instruments, yet their accuracy shames our assumptions about primitive minds. It suggests precision inherited rather than discovered. Imagine a dawn where stonemasons carry memories their tongues no longer understand. They cut according to rhythms transmitted orally, so many cubits to mirror the heavens, so many degrees from the north wind's path. The purpose has faded, but the ritual persists. Each cut restores a pattern, repeating equations too sacred or too forgotten to name. Architecture becomes an act of remembrance by hand. From Eridu to Göbekli Tepe, from the limestone of Egypt to the basalt terraces of the Andes, surfaces bear the same logic. An obsession with orientation, the transformation of rock into coordinate. These monuments were not improvised. They adhere to proportions derived from observation of sky and earth alike. Some orientations correspond to solstices, others to precessional thresholds beyond any agricultural necessity. Why align a temple to a star that will rise on that axis only once every 26,000 years? Unless continuity itself was the point. Consider the ziggurat at Ur, the massive stair linking earth and sky. Its base ratio approximates the same geometric relationships later found in Egyptian pyramids. Yet in Mesopotamia, the structure was described not as a tomb, but as a stairway of restoration, each level corresponding to a plane of creation. The engineers who conceived it worked as cosmographers. They built not for shelter, but for calibration, turning heaven's arc into architecture. In that design, bricks become language. Every baked unit, stamped with symbols, functions as a syllable in a silent chant. The alignment is the grammar, the height, a verse. The structure itself recites memory, voiceless and eternal. The people who ascended those steps were not worshipping, they were reading stone. Across time, the same physical language reappears. Megalithic sites thousands of kilometers apart employ identical methods of cutting, joining, and orienting rock. Some stones fit with microscopic precision, their surfaces fused by techniques we only approximate with machines. Others exhibit interlocking geometries that resist earthquakes, technologies far exceeding supposed chronological capabilities. Such details whisper of a legacy passed through oral or symbolic transmission long before written words stabilized it. The skeptic replies that coincidence is inevitable, that human minds faced with similar problems will discover analogous solutions. Yet the parallels extend beyond simple utility. Why carve massive polygonal blocks when smaller ones would suffice? Why align to constellations invisible in their era's horizon? Each excess gesture implies devotion to a formula not of necessity, but of obligation, to preserve a code, perhaps to signal something across time. In the dust of Uruk, archaeologists found tunnels beneath temples, hollow channels lined with gypsum. Their function remains uncertain. Some suggest ritual drainage, others acoustic resonance. But the precision of their angles, so close to canonical compass points, betrays deliberate calibration. If one hums within those corridors even today, a low tone amplifies, vibrating as though the entire structure were a harmonic device. Geometry becomes frequency. Masonry becomes memory, vibrating within silence. Imagine you are inside one of those corridors, torchlight flickering. The air feels tangible, thick, responsive. A faint tone grows from nowhere, deep enough to resonate in your chest. It feels impossible that ancient builders could design such precision intentionally. But the resonance is no accident. Sound, for them, was structure. To rebuild the world after chaos, one must first establish vibration, the pulse that defines order. Stone is its eternal tuning fork. Mathematicians examining site proportions note recurring ratios, 3 to 4 to 5 triangles, the square root of 2, hexagonal divisions marking terraces. These values are not random. They are expressions of fundamental harmonics. Ancient engineers sought beauty through stability, but their stability was cosmic. They copied from older models not preserved in drawings, but embedded in oral formulae. Each ratio is an echo, a remembered measurement once tied to the sky itself. The Sumerians attributed their building wisdom to figures called the antediluvian sages, the Apkallu, beings who taught geometry before the flood. The stories sound mythic, yet they mirror technical truths, construction principles older than written record. When the waters came, those formulas might have survived in ritual chant or encoded myth, re-emerging as architecture centuries later. Thus, the builders after the deluge worked not as inventors, but as translators of a vanished engineer's language. Each stone cut into place was a syllable in that translation. On hot days, one can see fingerprints still impressed upon ancient bricks, the tactile residue of people passing memory through gesture. Their teachers were ghosts, yet the continuity was tangible. To measure was to commune, to feel alignment as obedience. The forgotten engineers are not individuals, but a lineage of hands repeating mathematics without its theoretical context. In Egypt, similar patterns persist. Temples adhere to canons identical to Mesopotamian ratios. Overlapping cultures appear to speak a shared architectural dialect. The same system of correspondence between heaven and ground, between angle and season, pervades distant structures. Coincidence surrenders to symmetry. Across continents, stoneworkers remembered the same instructions: build where the stars once were, and time will remember you. The enigma deepens when we examine the masonry itself. Many blocks display tool marks inconsistent with hammer and chisel. Surfaces melt in curves suggesting thermal alteration, as though softened before joining. Scholars debate whether water, sand, or chemistry achieved this fit. None agree, but all recognize intent. The result is precision measured in millimeters where none was required. Complexity insists on purpose, and purpose implies knowledge. To the modern mind, such perfection seems excessive, a waste of effort without practical gain. Yet for those civilizations, practicality was secondary. They built for eternity, not economy. A temple was not infrastructure but encryption, the preservation of ratio against decay. If stone endures, then message endures. The forgotten engineers spoke to the future through endurance itself. Every civilization that followed built atop those foundations, sometimes literally. Later cultures mistook technical inheritance for divine heritage, deifying the architects as gods or demiurges. Over time, gratitude became worship, and formula became ritual. The memory of method dissolved into myth, leaving us with legends of beings descending to instruct humankind. Those beings were probably human ancestors remembering something sacred, the grammar of permanence. When you gaze at the stepped platforms of notice the silence. It is the same silence of the flood's aftermath, the measured pause between cataclysm and recollection. Each brick is a note of defiance against entropy. Each line of alignment is a sentence in an ancient vocabulary of order. Standing before it, you participate in the continuity, one pair of eyes among thousands across epochs staring upward at a geometry that refuses to die. If we read the stones correctly, they tell a single message repeated through architecture worldwide. Nothing is new. What rises today already rose before. What we call innovation is often reanimation of old structure buried within collective instinct. Those patterns in our cities, the grid, the dome, the measured column, derive from templates inscribed in deep time. We build as the ancients did because the geometry builds us in return. Think of the engineers who stood beneath a blazing sun aligning contours with shadows. They would never see the celestial cycles their efforts acknowledged. Their work was not for their century but for recurrence thousands of years later, when others would rebuild again. In their minds, eternity was not duration but repetition. To build correctly was to reattach the present to the order of the cosmos. Their legacy remains all around us, though unspoken. Every cornerstone we lay repeats their prayer in different language. Every measurement system, every architectural canon, testifies to their vision that precision equals survival. When chaos floods knowledge, geometry endures because it is etched into both stone and instinct. We are still obeying their formulae, even when we no longer remember why. One might say civilization itself is their cathedral, each new age adding bricks upon ancient design, never daring to alter its fundamental proportions. The forgotten engineers are buried not in graves but in symmetry, their immortality preserved through repetition. You can feel them in the ratios of modern cities, in the proportions of bridges and towers rising toward lost constellations. They whisper each time a plumb line falls true. Stone, after all, remembers what flesh forgets. It keeps within its lattice the vibration of thought made physical. To read those vibrations is to converse across extinctions. Their message remains unchanged. Rebuild faithfully, for everything that has fallen will rise again, aligned to the same stars that once watched it drown. And so civilization continues its recursion, each epoch laying hand upon hand with those long vanished, each structure vibrating softly with the echoes of forgotten engineers. The stars remember what the earth forgets. While civilizations crumble into silt and code erodes under water or war, the heavens keep their slow arithmetic intact. Every rise, every setting, Every precession of a solstice leaves a trail of geometry that the patient observer can retrieve. This is why the ancients built with reference to the night sky. Their architectures were not only temples to gods, but calibrations to time itself. Imagine standing upon the plains near ancient Ur as dusk bleeds into violet. One by one, the constellations ignite, and among them, the patterns that recur through myth and ritual, the hunter, the bull, the lion. The priests of that age watched not for fortune, but for order. They mapped cycles stretching beyond a human lifespan, inscribing them on clay so the stars could guide their descendants through ages of forgetting. Their mathematics was not abstract. It was the memory of celestial movement, frozen in notation. Sumerian astronomer priests understood that mankind's true calendar rested not in the sun alone, but in the great spiral of precession. Each age of roughly 26,000 years shifted the heavens' backdrop, altering which star marked the solstice and equinox. To them, this was cosmic respiration, the universe inhaling and exhaling civilizations. They tracked those shifts through observation and ritual geometry, embedding stellar data within the orientation of their temples. The ziggurat of Ur, the White Temple at Uruk, and early sanctuaries at Eridu share axial alignments that no agricultural need explains. Each structure points towards stellar coordinates, accurate millennia before or after their use. To modern archaeologists, this seems anomaly. To ancient minds, it was remembrance. They were rebuilding the sky as it had once appeared, synchronizing human architecture with cosmic archive. In these measurements lies unease. How could early civilizations without instruments map the precessional drift of the heavens, the slow wobble of Earth's axis evident only over generations? Did they witness the transition between ages, or inherit knowledge carried through oral formulae more ancient than writing? Either possibility unsettles the linear model of discovery. If the sky served as their clock, then time itself becomes evidence of forgotten tutors. The Sumerians described fixed stations called mi, ordinances of heaven and earth decreed before humanity. These were natural laws as well as celestial benchmarks, symbolic of cosmic order. The stars were not decoration, but legislation, each one a point of governance in the architecture of destiny. When they oriented temples or cities, they were reasserting those ancient decrees, reattaching civilization to the lawful sky. Across the world, the same compulsion endured. Egyptian pyramids aligned with Orion's belt, their shafts aimed towards stars that marked renewal and judgment. In Central America, step pyramids mirrored planetary synods through shadow and light. In the highlands of Anatolia, stone circles recorded lunar standstills centuries before formal calendars. Everywhere humanity synchronized its architecture to the remembered order above. The stars became the universal scripture. What is striking is not simply parallelism, but precision. Between distant cultures, the same numeric constants emerge: 360 degrees of the circle, 12 divisions of the year, the sexagesimal hour. Such conventions could have arisen locally, or they could have descended as inheritance from an earlier system designed to encode celestial geometry for survival. If the Earth can be flooded, perhaps the sky was humanity's external hard drive, immortal, retrievable, patient. Imagine the night on which a Sumerian priest climbs the ziggurat's summit to record the heliacal rising of Sirius. He waits through cold silence until the first glint appears above the horizon. That instant marks the new year, but also something more profound: continuity. He repeats a gesture performed for thousands of years by predecessors whose names are gone. The star rises not only in space but in consciousness, bridging epochs with a single point of light. To them, stars were not remote but intimate. Each had personality and purpose, its course predicting fates, floods, and fortunes. Yet this was not superstition. Their omens were data encoded in narrative, methods of preserving observation through story. When modern minds dismiss such myth as fantasy, they overlook that myth was once algebra performed aloud, equations retold in poetry for memory's sake. Even the placement of early observatories reveals that understanding. Sumerian structures balanced latitude with the declination of key stars, so that critical risings occurred along perfect symmetry with temple corners. They did not read the sky from chance. They built instruments from mud brick. Each city became a calendar in architecture, each street an axis uniting heaven's dome with earth's grid. The observers walked inside their own star map. But celestial recording served a deeper psychological purpose. After the flood, after the loss of archives, the sky was the one constant that could not be erased. Each night it returned, whispering the same numbers, the same intervals. To watch it was to remember what the earth had buried. Observing stars was a survival reflex of memory, the cosmos as morning made mathematical. As centuries passed, myths retained fragments of those observations. The Sumerian figure of the fish, later adapted into Pisces, the bull of heaven into Taurus, the lion of Uruk into Leo. These were not random animals but markers of long astronomical ages, ages remembered through symbolic storytelling. Civilization was literally timed against the stars, each myth a timestamp preserved through metaphor. Over time, the mathematics behind those alignments moved westward, transcribed into Greek geometry and later into Arabic astronomy. Yet within those later systems remain anomalies, constants that predate their supposed discovery by millennia. The sexagesimal division of circles, the calculation of synodic months, even the recognition of axial tilt all echo the ancient discipline of sky measurement. As we know, it may therefore be a palimpsest of much older precision, rewritten in new tongues but tracing the same constellational skeleton. Look upward tonight and the same stars blink, though shifted slightly from their ancient stations. Their drift marks how many civilizations have risen and fallen since Sumer. You are, in a sense, continuing the chain. Every time you measure, you extend their line through time, and the thought may unsettle. That observation itself is the ritual they intended to preserve, that awareness of the cosmos is the true inheritance of a vanished world. Within this idea hides a paradox. The ancients knew the stars change slowly, yet they built as if to fix them forever. Their cities act as timestamps, frozen coordinates of sky upon earth. To decode them is to resurrect their worldview, humanity as participant in cosmic order, not its master. The heavens were the constant architecture and man, the brief tenant synchronizing his walls to its rhythm. The emotional weight of this recognition is profound. Those people looked upward not for divine reassurance, but for reassurance of continuity, that they were rebuilding according to templates too vast to comprehend. To stray from the stars was to invite chaos. Their faith was not theistic, but geometric, a reverence for equilibrium. And within that equilibrium they found identity, a fragile membership in the universe's rhythm. Perhaps this is why, even now, we gaze upward in longing. Satellites orbit where ziggurats once pointed. We continue to etch coordinates upon the sky, mapping not gods, but galaxies. Yet beneath technical progress, the same instinct persists, a desire to preserve meaning by aligning with something beyond decay. The stars remain the trusted archive, indifferent yet intimate, forever repeating the memory of measure. If we think of civilization as dialogue between heaven and earth, then astronomy is the conversation's first language. Every culture that looked upward joined the chorus of continuity. The constellations became cross-cultural vocabulary, ensuring that knowledge outlived catastrophe. Through the night sky, humanity achieved immortality of thought, tethering its destiny to predictable cycles. And so, the stars remember. They remember each rise of Uruk, each fall of empires drowned in silt. They remember the trembling hands pressing symbols into clay to note their paths. In their light lingers the unspoken message of Sumer and its precursors. Do not forget the ratios of the heavens. For one day, when silence swallows the cities again, those who watch the stars will rediscover our outline in their glow. The cosmos keeps the minutes of lost civilizations, patiently waiting for us to read them once more. If civilization remembered itself through stone, it spoke through language. Words are fossils of meaning, compressed strata of forgotten epochs. When we study ancient tongues, we are not merely decrypting communication, we are excavating memory. And among all lost languages, Sumerian stands as the strangest relic of inheritance, an orphaned grammar, whispering of worlds older than writing itself. Imagine encountering the first clay tablets bearing Sumerian script. Their wedges are precise, almost mechanical, and yet, behind their order lies something alien. Linguists, upon deciphering them, quickly realized that this was no Semitic or Indo-European tongue. It belonged nowhere. Sumerian is a linguistic isolate, without known relatives, without lineage, existing like a solitary monument on the plane of human speech. That isolation is itself a geological feature of history. Languages evolve through contact, migration, or conquest. Yet here was a system of grammar immaculately self-contained, as if transplanted from another soil. It uses agglutination, words formed from smaller units attached like beads to a core. This structure suggests refinement, not invention, for it allows precision and abstraction beyond the needs of early administration. The first bureaucrats wrote as if inheriting syntax from scholars who never lived in their cities. The efficiency of Sumerian grammar remains haunting. Verb chains encode subject, object, tense, aspect, and mood in a single flow of logic. Suffixes stack to carry meaning that in modern tongues would require entire clauses. Such compression implies deep evolution through centuries of use, and yet we meet it fully matured in its first appearance. There is no linguistic childhood, only articulate adulthood. The language remembers more than its speakers do. In that memory, scholars glimpse ghost vocabularies, technical terminologies without apparent everyday context. Words for astronomical observation, volumetric measurement, and mineral classification appear in the earliest texts. Their presence is puzzling. Why would the first farmers of recorded history possess terminology better suited for a civilization of scientists? Unless these were fragments of an older corpus, remnants of a professional language once used to catalogue the heavens and the earth. Imagine language as an artifact, passed from survivors through rote repetition, used before it is understood. A child reciting formulas without knowing what they describe, only that they must be preserved. That is the impression Sumerian gives. Its logic feels second-hand, as if designed for thoughts more complex than its new context required. The scribes replicated patterns beyond their comprehension, ensuring survival of a structure even while losing its reason. One might say that Sumerian behaves more like a code than a living tongue. Its morphemes operate modularly, each obeying strict positional laws, as though constructed by linguistic engineers. Such design resembles how modern programming languages evolve, optimize systems for data management. This lends weight to the suspicion that Sumerian was not the spontaneous outgrowth of Mesopotamian peasants, but the preserved residue of scholars rebuilding from linguistic templates older than the flood. Consider the way Sumerians spoke of their knowledge. To teach was not to innovate, but to remember. The very word for wisdom conveyed restoration, to make something as it once was. Their mythic traditions stated that language originally unified all beings until catastrophe shattered it. The divine act of re-establishing speech was therefore the act of civilization's renewal. To speak was to reorder the world according to an older blueprint. When linguists compare Sumerian with its later neighbors, the Akkadian, the Babylonian, the Assyrian, they find not gradual transformation, but translation. Akkadians borrowed the script and reinterpreted many Sumerian words, absorbing them like fossils embedded in a new cultural layer. Yet even then, they revered Sumerian as sacred, keeping it alive in temple schools long after it vanished from common use. It became, quite literally, the language of the gods, the tongue of origin. That sanctification suggests subconscious recognition that its age transcended memory. The scribes who copied Sumerian hymns in the first millennium before our era did not understand every word they wrote. They treated it as incantation, not communication. You can sense the reverence of those hands pressing stylus against clay, maintaining rhythm without comprehension. Their repetition was not ignorance, it was ritual continuity, preserving fragments of prehistory through sound. A linguistic isolate is an archaeological anomaly frozen in time. Each sentence written in Sumerian compresses layers of function and mythology, grammatical strata unconnected to nearby tongues. Some analysts detect patterns reminiscent of languages from far regions, suffix similarities with Uralic, structural echoes of Dravidian, numerical cognates faintly resonant with later Asian families. None conclusive, all suggestive. It feels less like coincidence and more like diffusion from a shared ancestor now erased. The precision of its numerical lexicon reveals similar complexity. Number terms scale perfectly within the sexagesimal system, integrating seamlessly with mathematics and astronomy. The words for 60, 360, and 3600 carry internal symmetry, as if designed simultaneously with the numerical base itself. Language and mathematics co-emerged, reinforcing one another. Their vocabulary is memory-shaped into sound. Every civilization leaves behind a linguistic fingerprint of its consciousness. In Sumerian's patterns, we perceive a mentality both bureaucratic and cosmic, concerned with ratios but also with mythic exactness. Its words are pragmatic for taxation yet poetic for observation, naming constellations, stones, and time with equal economy. The dual function feels inherited rather than invented, a fusion of and story from an earlier, vanished synthesis. Now picture a Sumerian schoolroom in the city of Ur, the air thick with chalk and dust. Students copy tablets line by line, repeating conjugations older than any living memory. They know the system works because it always has, though none can recall who composed its logic. The room vibrates with collective remembrance disguised as rote exercise. Each impression of the stylus perpetuates an ancient circuit of communication. Hidden within these grammatical forms lies a world view. The agglutinative structure mirrors their astronomy, modules orbiting a central meaning, each element influencing the whole. Sentences unfold like orbits, predictable yet alive. The very mechanics of their language are mathematical, reflecting continuity between speech and cosmos. Sumerian was not just spoken, it was computed aloud. But through time, that system fragmented. Translation into Semitic dialects simplified its logic, stripping compound meanings into discrete words. The inherited structure could not sustain itself without ritual preservation. When the temple schools fell silent, a fracture opened in humanity's linguistic memory. The isolate became artifact, its grammar fossilized like coral exposed by receding tides. Yet its influence never disappeared entirely. Elements of its numerical and lexical design migrated invisibly into later systems. The months, the degrees of the circle, even echoes within modern semantic routes of measurement. We continue to live within the parameters that language defined. Like the bricks of ziggurats, these syllables have outlasted empires, shaping how we express depth, time, and counting without realizing whose voice first named them. In this way, Sumerian is less a lost language than a haunting. Its residue saturates human communication. Every time someone measures a moment as 60 seconds or refers to a circle's 360 degrees, they unconsciously recite fragments of that original song. The words are gone, but the cadence remains. Syntax has become the vessel of immortality. Think about the implications. If one language could survive extinction by converting its structure into ours, what else persists invisibly? Perhaps beneath modern tongues linger ancient architectures of thought, grammatical fossils guiding our cognition. Civilization may evolve not by invention, but by reactivation of silent heritage encoded deep within speech itself. To speak, then, is to awaken ghosts of meaning older than history. When archaeologists unearth a tablet, what they truly recover is not content, but continuity. Each inscription restores a few syllables of humanity's first conversation with itself. The miracle is not that we can translate Sumerian, but that the pattern still resonates enough for translation to exist. Across 6,000 years, the syntax still holds, flexing under modern air like a revived tendon of culture. So perhaps language, like stone and star, is a bridge across forgetting. The Sumerians may have believed that speech itself descends from heaven because it precedes survival. It carries the formulas necessary to rebuild after every flood. The tongue that has no family endures because it serves as foundation for all that follow. Its isolation is not loneliness, it is preservation. Listen carefully to your own language, the rhythm, the structure, the strange underlying symmetry. Hidden within, the old tongue murmurs. It reminds us that we are not inventors but inheritors, translating the ancient inheritance of grammar into new forms. Words do not die, they transform, carrying fragments of the first civilizations wherever breath still moves through memory. And in that quiet continuity, Sumer still speaks. In the silent vaults of museums, clay tablets sleep under glass. Their surfaces are scored with wedges too precise to be mistaken for random marks. What they record is not myth, but measurement, numbers written to bridge the human hand with eternity. From these fragments, our species learned it had once known the world in ratios, long before ink or iron measured civilization again. The origins of mathematics emerge already mature in Sumer. There is no visible evolution from primitive counting to advanced calculation. Instead, arithmetic appears complete, whole, polished, fully functional. The base of 60 governs their numeration, their time, and their geometry, binding heaven and earth into one continuous ledger. Every circle divided into 360 degrees is an echo of that base. This perfection demands explanation. No earlier record shows experimentation that could have birthed such a system. To the archaeologists who first read those tablets, it seemed as though humanity had begun mid-sentence. A finished vocabulary of quantity existed before its historical context. The slab known as Plimpton 322 exemplifies this mastery, a catalogue of right triangles so accurate that modern trigonometry recognizes its logic immediately. Yet it predates the supposed discovery of those relationships by millennia. Imagine a scribe sitting at his table of wet clay, inscribing ratios with deliberate calm. He does not invent, he recalls. Each line of numbers represents memory transcribed into matter, a language older than writing itself. To him, geometry is not abstract but devotional, a means of harmonizing architecture with the laws that shaped the stars. His stylus carves the grammar of eternity. The sexagesimal system Sumerians used remains unmatched in elegance. The number 60 divides by 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, allowing fractions to express themselves cleanly in trade, land division, and astronomy. Its structure fuses the practical and the cosmic, calibrating the temple's economy and the orbit of Venus with equal grace. Through this base, daily life mirrored celestial precision. To measure grain was to echo the stars. On the tablets, we find tables of reciprocals and squares inscribed centuries before the earliest known mathematical schools elsewhere. Each column lists computed values with no errors, suggesting both familiarity and instruction. But from where did that instruction originate? The Sumerians themselves attributed their formulas to antediluvian sages, to knowledge preserved before the flood. They believed calculation existed before catastrophe, surviving only through those who remembered it sufficiently to restore civilization. Mathematics was their bridge through the abyss. After the waters receded, survivors needed more than memory of stories. They needed ratios to rebuild walls, canals, and calendars. Geometry guided them as compass and scripture. Every measurement performed was a kind of resurrection. To count was to restore order against chaos. Their arithmetic permeated daily bureaucracy. Taxes, irrigation quotas, and rations all employed that same symmetrical logic. Numbers governed not by authority but by harmony. Law itself encoded within numerical proportionality. Fairness was a mathematical, not moral, ideal. Justice, in their view, was the correct fraction between giver and taker. At higher levels, mathematics became theology. Each god corresponded to a number, each ritual to a sequence. Measurements enacted creation again in miniature, aligning society with the universe's deep syntax. The temple accountant and the priest were two faces of the same vocation, custodians of equilibrium. What they calculated, they prayed for. What they prayed for, they measured. Imagine their observation under the open sky, counting the days between lunar standstills, noting the exact moment Venus vanished behind dawn. Their calculations transcended mere astronomy. They were reconstructions of memory encoded in the heavens. The numbers did not predict, they recalled. Through repetition, they imitated the cosmic cycles known to their predecessors, proving that remembrance could be mathematical. The Plimpton tablet holds the ghost of this recall. Its columns record triple sets of numbers, proportional relationships between squares and diagonals. Long before Pythagoras, long before formal proof, someone in Sumer understood the geometry of right angles. The implications are immense. This was not empirical tinkering, but systemized knowledge passed intact across generations. The dust still carries equations no longer taught, but instantly recognizable. To modern scholars, such evidence hints at schools of computation older than any recorded bureaucracy. The scribes must have inherited methods requiring consistency and tools for verification. Yet those tools have not survived, only their results remain, coherent across centuries. Mathematics, therefore, acts as the most faithful memory of all, the continuity of logic immune to fire and flood. But mathematics also tells of loss. Beyond technical proficiency lies mystery. Certain constants embedded in their systems seem arbitrary yet precise, as if derived from circumstances unknown to later cultures. Ratios replicating celestial motion, proportions matching planetary cycles, and harmonics paralleling musical intervals suggest interdisciplinary awareness collapsed in later eras. Knowledge fragmented, mythology replacing the equations that once explained divine order directly. The tension between perfection and disappearance defines Sumer's mathematical legacy. It arrives too soon, too developed, and vanishes without progeny until rediscovered thousands of years later. How could a civilization invent precision only to forget it? Unless invention is not the right word. Perhaps they resurrected rather than created, a culture of scientists working from salvaged fragments of a greater corpus, lost to time. In their number 600, we glimpse symbolism of the cycle, the rounding of worlds, the completion of epochs. This same pattern reappears across myths as ages of metal or suns. Mathematics becomes the language through which myth maintains coherence. To compute time is to confess participation in a universe that repeats its disasters. The Sumerians counted to remember, aware that each sequence might reset when the flood returned. Consider how they visualized space. Their geometry treated corners and diagonals not as static properties, but as processes of balance. The square was sacred because it reconciled extremes, north and south, heaven and earth. The circle represented the unbroken cycle of celestial order. Together they symbolized stability, civilization between chaos and infinity, drawn with compass, invisible but ancient. Later civilizations adopted these forms but forgot their origin. The Babylonians reformulated them mechanically. The Greeks rediscovered their truths through abstraction. Yet the essence remained, ratios recycled through cultures, relics of one primal discipline that once united counting, music, and architecture under a single worldview. Every theorem we now rediscover may be less an innovation than an echo. Mathematics, like language, is an inherited skeleton. Each generation adds notation, but rarely new bones. When Sumer disappeared, the form slept within minds, unborn, waiting for rediscovery. Modern scientists, when they describe space-time in curvature and frequency, mirror the same fusion of geometry and divinity. The human impulse to find proportion in oblivion endures because it began here, among the scribes of the alluvial plain, turning flood clay into geometry. Picture a single tablet resting half buried in silence, its edges eroded, its wedges faded yet legible. Those numbers still balance perfectly, their logic unharmed by thousands of years. What does it mean that mathematics survives when languages and kingdoms die? It means that truth, once formulated, resists extinction. Equations are fossils of comprehension, remembering the intellect of the world before the waters came. Every modern instrument, from metronome to satellite, operates upon rhythms that culture discovered in the span of one civilization's rebirth. We continue that rebirth unknowingly. Each hour we measure, each circle we divide, is ritual disguised as routine. Numbers are our last religion, their precision a prayer to continuity. Through them the dead speak clearly. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel the pressure of the stylus against soft clay. Hear the soft rhythm of calculation in the dark. It is the sound of survival, the pulse of intellect refusing to vanish. Through arithmetic, memory persists without voice or mythic embellishment. Sumer's genius was not invention but transcription, translating cosmic law into the language of dust. And so we inherit their devotion whenever we count, whether in seconds or stars. Their equations became the hidden structure of our civilization, as enduring as gravity itself. To study them is to stare through time at the mind's reflection in mud, brick, and number. The clay remembers, even when we forget. Within every formula we solve, a faint rhythm whispers, "Once we knew this already." In the dawn of written memory, before history hardened into chronology, the Sumerians left a list. It looks at first glance like any other royal catalogue: names, cities, durations of rule. But as you read, unease sets in. Some reigns span not decades, but tens of thousands of years. These are the kings before the flood, the spectral dynasties who ruled a civilization erased from both earth and certainty. Imagine unrolling that ancient record, its cuneiform lines etched with the calm precision of bureaucracy. There is no mythic tone, no exaggeration of style, just a counting. The list begins plainly. When kingship descended from heaven, it was established in Eridu. Then follow names so strange they sound less human than symbolic, each ruling for spans that make eternity seem administrative. To the scribes who copied it, this was not legend, it was data. Those numbers are so vast they destabilize logic. Reigns of 36,000 years, of 28,000 years. Figures that slip beyond biological plausibility. The temptation is to dismiss them as mythic exaggeration, allegory for divine rulership. Yet their precision contradicts such dismissal. If these were metaphors, why such specificity? Why use the language of inventory to detail the impossible? Beneath this tension lies the real mystery. The record's division between antediluvian and post-diluvian kings. The flood serves as watershed, the line between mythic and measurable. Before it, reigns stretched into the cosmic. After it, they collapse into mortal longevity. It is as though time itself contracted after catastrophe, the human clock resetting under new cosmic conditions. Archaeology rarely finds comfort in such texts. Scholars mark them as mythological, dismissing their durations as symbolic numerology. But those numbers are multiples of 3,600, a key value in Sumerian cosmology, linked to cycles of heaven and the orbital language of astronomy. Perhaps these vast reigns recorded not years as we know them, but epochs measured in a cosmic rhythm now forgotten. If so, the kings before the flood were not ancients. They were eras. Imagine the king list not as genealogy but as chronology encrypted in names. Each sovereign might represent an age defined by celestial alignment, geological stability, or knowledge preserved. Their exaggerated lifespans could mark not human years, but cosmic durations. The text becomes a geological memory written in political code. History here is not linear but cyclical, each dynasty the echo of one planetary heartbeat. The first cities named, Eridu, Badtibira, Larak, Sippar, Shuruppak, all appear in archaeology as sites of early sophistication, yet none show transitional growth. They rise suddenly, architecturally coherent, already literate, already divine. It is as if they inherited blueprints rather than invented urbanism. When the flood destroyed them, their survivors carried both fragments and formulae into the new era, reducing cosmic time into mortal administration. To hold the tablet today is to feel the friction between myth and geology. Its clay has been baked and buried, dredged from sediments left by real floods. Between its lines lies both bureaucracy and prophecy, as if the ancients believed that listing itself could anchor memory against oblivion. The act of enumeration becomes sacred, naming as defiance of the erasure that drowned their predecessors. Through administrative order, they fought entropy. Yet the kings before the flood refuse domestication. They loom as archetypes, the engineer kings, the lawgivers, the astronomers and sages. Some traditions call them the seven sages, each linked to a principle or craft that defines civilization: writing, mathematics, metalwork, agriculture, governance, architecture, ceremony. They are not individuals, but functions, the anatomy of order personified. Each era remembered one, as though recomposing a broken whole. Consider how the first post-flood rulers described themselves. They did not claim invention, they claimed restoration. Their scribes used verbs of recovery, of replication. The city was rebuilt as it had been, laws reinstated as remembered. Kingship re-established what had once been divine routine. Civilization, in their eyes, was an act of translation, from celestial archive back into human hands. That pattern mirrors geological reality. Archaeologists find beneath the early dynastic strata a scar of flood deposits, sterile mud, then sudden renewal. Above that seam, cultural continuity revives with uncanny familiarity. Tools, art, and measurement systems reappear almost unchanged. Civilization had not evolved anew, it had resurfaced, remembering its lost order through careful imitation. To the Sumerians, this continuity was proof of legitimacy. The further back kings traced their authority, the more sacred it became. The first kings after the flood ruled not by conquest, but by heritage. Their duty was to mirror divine governance as preserved in myth. Each act of law-giving, each temple dedication, was performance of ancestral memory, a reassembly of authority inherited from drowned dynasties. But what if those ancestors were not divine at all, merely remnants of a previous advanced culture, mythologized over generations? The king list might then preserve the last administrative echo of a forgotten humanity whose timekeeping, astronomy, and governance exceeded the understanding of later ages. What appears as supernatural longevity could be distortion of data, measured in unfamiliar units or recorded allegorically by those who only half comprehended the legacy they copied. In this reading, the kings before the flood are the same engineers whose mathematics, architecture, and art underpin Sumerian accomplishment. Their reigns, extended by translation errors or conceptual shifts, are artifacts of memory stretched by mythic expression. The numbers carry not fantasy but mistranslation of calibration, the conversion between sacred and solar measures. What remains is not fiction, but residue of calculation. Even if purely mythical, their narrative achieves something vital. It redefines humanity's role in time. The antediluvian kings embody completeness, harmony between heaven and earth. The flood fractures that perfection, fragmenting knowledge into survival instinct. Post-flood rulers labor to recover fragments, measuring themselves against unreachable ancestors. In that longing, civilization gains its tragic grandeur, always rebuilding, never original. Throughout Mesopotamia, analogous traditions echo this loss. Each culture carries tales of pre-human or semi-divine beings who structured the cosmos before catastrophe. Whether called Anunnaki, Neteru, or Watchers, they serve the same narrative purpose: custodianship of order before dissolution. Their downfall signifies humanity's inheritance of divine burdens: mortality, imperfection, ignorance. From the ruins of their long reign, we learn what it means to begin again. The king list thus becomes both scripture and diagnosis. It records not divine genealogy, but the psychology of a species aware of forgetting itself. The impossible numbers express yearning for a past unbounded by death. Yet within that yearning hides a scientific awareness, an understanding of cycles and resets in both and culture. The document's authors sense that creation itself is iterative, that every flood is both end and restoration. Imagine the scribe pressing symbols into clay with absolute seriousness. He records reigns beyond reason, but his face shows no skepticism. To him, these records are true because truth measures continuity, not probability. His duty is to reproduce data, not interpret it. Faithful transcription preserves integrity better than comprehension. Through such faith, knowledge outlives understanding. Modern readers occupy both sides of this divide: rational debunkers and secret believers. Part of us accepts that the kings before the flood never lived. Another part recognizes the parable of endurance they embody. The Sumerians were remembering, not inventing. They encoded the trauma of loss and the persistence of restoration into a chronology of impossible reigns. In that paradox, history was born. If the antediluvian kings symbolize ages of immense order, then our current one may be viewed as the echo of theirs, an era again chasing equilibrium after collapse. Catastrophe may yet reassert its rhythm. Perhaps one day our own names measured in digital epochs will appear absurdly long to those who rediscover us after silence. They will read our data as myth, bewildered by numbers that no longer translate. The kings before the flood will remain as both warning and comfort. They remind us that even in the face of obliteration, memory adapts. It disguises itself in myth, encodes itself in bureaucracy, hides in numbers until deciphered anew. That is the meaning beneath the impossible reigns. Time will drown us, but the ledger somehow endures. And so the tablet continues to whisper through the centuries, its wedges still sharp under museum light. It murmurs of rule without measure, of dynasties that lasted longer than reason, of floods that erased, yet failed to erase completely. Whether we accept their existence or not, their shadow remains. The kings before the flood still rule in the realm of remembrance. custodians of a truth too vast to fit within history's brief breath. Civilization pretends to begin, but beginnings are illusions. Every wall raised carries the memory of another buried beneath it. Every story told echoes a version erased by time. Sumer did not invent humanity's order, it remembered it. The world they rebuilt after the flood was not a blank slate but an act of recovery, a slow translation of fractured memory into matter once again. Imagine yourself wandering through the ruined streets of Uruk, centuries after its height. The walls still breathe with heat from the sun, as if holding a pulse from something older. The layout follows a logic you cannot see yet feel. Proportions that comfort the eye like a melody remembered from childhood. Such geometry was not trial and error, it was invocation. Their architects were not innovators but interpreters rebuilding a design they trusted more than their own imagination. To rebuild is to resist forgetting. Each brick set in place became a syllable in a sentence that said, "We remember." That is why the Sumerians measured everything with obsessive precision: canals, temples, horizons, even laws. The pattern was sacred because it was inherited. Their civilization was less an invention than an archaeological project undertaken by survivors who understood that preservation, not novelty, ensures continuity. This idea that civilization is restoration changes how we understand history. It suggests that progress may be the shadow of recollection, not rebellion against the past. The first city planners, the first lawgivers, acted as caretakers of an invisible architecture spanning ages. Their achievements were acts of fidelity to memory, ensuring that the lost order of the world might be reconstructed in glimpses. What they revived became our foundation stones. The evidence lies in the abnormal perfection of their first achievements. Writing appears complete, mathematics begins refined, astronomy starts with accuracy unthinkable for novices. Their temples align with ancient celestial coordinates. Their myths recall geological events with uncanny specificity. Such synchronicity indicates continuity, the transmission of model to mimic, of archive to replica. The Sumerians were practicing memory on a civilizational scale. To them, divine authority was synonymous with historical obligation. The gods were those who remembered perfectly. When a king rebuilt a temple, inscriptions always proclaimed that it was restored upon its original foundations, never newly conceived. Even divine creation myths echoed this pattern. The universe itself was reassembled from primordial fragments, its chaos sculpted again into order by repetition of sacred procedure. Creation, repeated endlessly, was restoration of equilibrium lost. This concept saturates their political ideology. Legitimacy derived not from conquest, but from continuity. A ruler proved his worth by preserving the old laws and re-establishing the ancient measures, by copying, not innovating. Renewal meant exactness. Deviating from cosmic precedent invited catastrophe, for to alter the design was to invite another flood. Civilization, therefore, was a delicate act of translation between remembered perfection and mortal transience. Consider their libraries, those silent chambers of baked clay tablets. Each was both archive and ritual. Students copied texts over and over, preserving their content through motion, not meaning. Every stylus mark was a devotional gesture replicating the world's first writing. It was as if humanity sensed instinctively that understanding could perish, but imitation prolongs existence. In copying, the ancients slowed the erosion of memory. Imagine one such scribe, bent over his desk of clay, copying a hymn whose metaphors he no longer grasps. The meaning has already half vanished, but the form persists intact. His work becomes a human conduit for transmission of forgotten knowledge. Through him, the world before the flood still whispers in syntax he cannot interpret. In this paradox, civilization survives by echo, not by invention. Even the myths admit this dependence on prior models. When Enki bestows the me, the powers of civilization, upon humankind, they are not new creations, but restorations of cosmic principles once lost. Writing, leadership, fertility, and craftsmanship are described as rediscovered tools rather than divine novelties. Myth remembers what forgets, that creation is restoration disguised as genesis. What the gods grant already existed, buried beneath floods of time. Every civilization that came afterward repeated the same impulse. Egypt, Indus, Mesoamerica, all recall golden ages when their ancestors rebuilt after destruction. The cycle of loss and renewal is encoded universally because it mirrors the rhythm of itself: flood and drought, death and rising. The Sumerians embodied that rhythm consciously. Their architecture, oriented to celestial cycles, transformed recurrence into ritual. Through repetition, they turned disaster into design. Modern minds crave novelty, equating progress with rupture. Yet the ancients equated progress with remembrance. In their logic, invention was dangerous, a deviation from cosmic harmony. Restoration was sacred precisely because it honored forgotten proportions. To recover knowledge was to regain divine favor. Innovation, by contrast, risked chaos. And so their cities glowed not with the arrogance of discovery, but the humility of reconstruction. Think of a ziggurat rising over the desert, its base layered upon older ruins, its bricks inscribed with lines proclaiming reverence for ancient plans. That structure is both monument and palimpsest, containing the memory of generations who rebuilt the same mountain to sky. The act of stacking brick on brick mirrored the cosmic ascent, each tier a reminder that eternity is achieved through repetition, not revolution. Archaeologists scraping through strata confirm this continuity materially. Beneath later temples lie earlier versions, near identical in dimension, rebuilt after floods or fires. The site becomes a geological testament to remembrance. Even when rulers changed language or dynasty, they retained those same blueprints. Every civilization stands literally upon the ghost of itself, foundation stones fusing centuries into one enduring pattern. To see the world through Sumerian eyes is to accept that destruction is inevitable yet inconsequential if memory persists. Cataclysms cleanse, but what matters survives in symmetry, in measure, in ratio. The builders knew that stone weathers and clay dissolves, but geometry endures. They trusted mathematics and myth alike to carry the design forward. Their faith was empirical. That form outlasts material when truth is encoded in proportion. This is why, to them, the flood was not the end, but the measure of beginnings. Each deluge erased monuments, but validated the eternal pattern awaiting reconstruction. The survivors did not despair. They aligned again to the stars and started anew. Restoration was proof of life's fidelity to design. To rebuild was to remember being human. Even the evolution of their art tells this story. Reliefs repeat motifs with minor variations century after century. Lions, eagles, entwined serpents forming symmetry. These were not decorations, but mnemonics, reminders of archetypal truths. Visual memory guided hands long after comprehension faded. Through shape and proportion, the image recalled the idea beyond words. Every sculpture was inscription of remembrance in 3 dimensions. In our own age, this notion feels alien. We celebrate originality as salvation from monotony. Yet the ancients warn that forgetting is the true apocalypse, not repetition. The fall of worlds begins when humanity ceases to copy the celestial order faithfully. Civilization ends not in catastrophe but in distortion, when the template fails the reproduction. The flood, they feared, comes when harmony no longer finds reflection below. Viewed this way, Sumer's sudden brilliance becomes understandable. It was not invention without precedent, but restoration of design too complex to reinvent wholly. The survivors of earlier ages resurrected fragments, systems of measure, songs of stars, formulas of bricks. In their hands, memory crystallized again into architecture and law. They did not create our civilization, they remembered theirs. Even today, their legacy shapes us invisibly. The hours we divide, the months we name, the geometry we trust, all descend from their act of reconstitution. Every modern foundation stone continues their vow to resist oblivion through structure. Each new city repeats Uruk's rhythm in glass and steel. The restoration continues under different names. To restore is to confess the truth that nothing truly begins. Each generation awakens within ruins of prior meanings, rebuilding as best it can. The measure of civilization lies not in novelty but in fidelity to that ancient symmetry beneath the dust. The Sumerians knew this. Their story ends in continuity, not closure. The same clay, rewritten endlessly until time itself remembers its own circumference. Silence waits beneath every city. It seeps through the cracks of pavement and bone, carrying with it the echo of buried ages. If you listen closely, the ground hums faintly. Not noise, but memory vibrating in minerals. The earth remembers what we insist on forgetting, that all civilizations are temporary rehearsals of an older design. Imagine standing amid the ruins of Ur at dusk. The horizon glows copper, and wind moves across the ancient foundations like breath through hollow lung. You are surrounded by geometry once perfect, now fractured by time, yet the pattern still whispers its rhythm. In that cadence lies something unsettling, a sense that the stones are not dead, merely paused, waiting for recognition. The silence here is not emptiness but storage. Every absence contains information too vast for language. The pauses between eras preserve the data of loss. If clay could speak in frequencies lower than sound, it would tell you that the world does not die. It rehearses. It forgets on the surface only to remember deeper down. When archaeologists kneel to brush away dust, they are not uncovering history. They are listening to resonance. Every tablet, every wall is a sound wave solidified, a tone petrified into mud brick. What they find is not merely object, but vibration. To dig is to disturb the quiet rhythm of the earth's long meditation. Civilization as we know it hums above that stillness, unaware of the vast orchestra below. Imagine the entire planet as a library written in layers of silence. Each epoch, when finished, is folded under the next, its text unread but intact. The crust becomes parchment, the metals its ink. Humanity keeps overwriting the same manuscript, but the earlier pages remain, pressing upward faintly like half-forgotten dreams. The illusion of novelty shatters under this realization. There is nothing new, only revoiced memory. Even our bones imitate this archive. Within their calcium are minerals drawn from the same plains where Sumer once stood. The molecules that built ziggurats now build our cities, our skins, our devices. The transfer never stops. We are geological reflections of earlier civilizations animated by their residue. History is not behind us. It circulates through our blood. What terrifies about this continuity is its indifference. The cycle will repeat regardless of our attention. Floods will come. Technologies will crumble. Silence will gather again. Yet in that silence, memory recalibrates. Geological time is patient. It will wait until the next consciousness uncovers, translates, and rebuilds. Oblivion is never permanent. It is intermission. The Sumerians understood this rhythm intuitively. They built not to defy time, but to harmonize with it. Their cities were tuning forks, resonating with celestial frequencies. Temples were not monuments. They were listening devices, meant to capture the pulse of eternity in stone. That is why even ruins hum when touched by wind. They are still participating in conversation with the cosmos. We misinterpret this silence as void when it is actually signal. Ancient builders tried to amplify those signals through structure, through ratio, through measure. To them, mathematics and myth were two languages describing the same vibration. Each equation was an act of translation, an attempt to transcribe the inaudible order pulsing through existence. The silence itself was meaning, encoded in frequency beyond word. Consider how even destruction obeys pattern. Catastrophes are not interruptions but punctuation marks in the syntax of time. The flood, the fall, the collapse, these are commas, not periods. Civilization continues its sentence with new phrasing, keeping the rhythm intact. Silence becomes the connective tissue between ages, binding loss to rebirth. Modern culture, deafened by its own acceleration, has forgotten how to listen. We fill every pause with noise, mistaking volume for longevity. Yet the future will record us not by our words, but by our residues, the minerals deposited by our machines, the trace elements of our circuits dissolving into the soil. These will become new cuneiform, the unconscious writing of our age. The silence below will absorb it, as it always has. Imagine millennia from now, an archaeologist of another epoch uncovering our ruins. They will find patterns too perfect to seem accidental, our grids, our formulas, our architectures of repetition. And they will wonder whether we too inherited rather than invented, whether our own civilization was another act of remembrance. They will read our silence the way we read Sumer's clay, listening for the vibration that never stops. In that sense, silence becomes the true historian. It records without prejudice or interpretation. It accepts every triumph and failure with equal density. Over eons, it compresses the noise of civilizations into sedimentary data, erasing emotion but preserving pattern. The Earth, it turns out, is the most accurate witness because it does not believe, it remembers. There is a kind of mercy in this. Our greatest fear is to be forgotten, yet forgetting is how the planet archives. Memory must descend into darkness to survive purification. Noise burns, silence fossilizes. The deeper a culture sinks into obscurity, the more secure its essence becomes. The flood is not annihilation, it is storage. To recognize this truth is to feel both awe and dread. Humanity's struggle for permanence looks fragile beside the patience of stone. The monuments we raise today will crumble long before the planet's mind forgets them. Yet that transience does not negate meaning, it sanctifies it. Every act of creation contributes another tone to the buried symphony beneath us. Reflect on how fragile our archives are. Data stored on volatile silicon, knowledge floating in sunlit networks. When silence comes again, and it will, much will vanish instantly. But the pattern, the geometry, the rhythm underlying our structures will survive. Just as Sumer's mathematics and astronomy exceeded its ruins, so will our own ratios endure, translated into whatever form consciousness takes next. Memory migrates, form remains. Perhaps that is why ancient myths end not in destruction, but in return. The flood rescinds, the land re-emerges, the seed germinates. Silence, having done its work, exhales. Each cycle restores the conversation between matter and meaning. The survivors rebuild because silence demands articulation. It will not allow permanence, only rhythm. Listen carefully to the present world, the pulse of electric grids, the hum of machines, the digital tide that never sleeps. Beneath all of it lies the same breath that moved through reed flutes on Sumer's riverbanks. The frequency has changed, the instruments evolved, but the song's core persists. Civilization hums in different octaves of the same melody. The silence gathers each note without judgment. If there is a lesson in the ruins, it is humility. We are participants in a cyclical restoration too vast to control. Every blueprint we draw, every law we inscribe, is an echo of an older intention nested within the planet's deep grammar. To live consciously within that rhythm is not despair. It is reverence. It is to understand that silence carries more truth than speech. Perhaps the end is not an end at all, but a return to the waiting quiet. When humanity falls silent, the earth will resume its slow articulation. New hands will rise from the mud, guided by whispers only geology can hear. They will find our traces, our formulas, our tremors, and begin again. Restoration will follow as inevitably as sunrise after flood. The memory and the silence is what binds all epochs. It is the pulse beneath the soil, the vibration that turns dust into remembrance. To hear it is to belong to something far older than civilization, older than mortality. So pause and listen. Beneath your feet, the buried world is still speaking, and through its silence, it remembers you.
If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe, and activate notifications so you don't miss our next videos.